Sunday talk.
Good talk.
News talk.
Talk radio.
The Tice Man cometh.
Stir up your Sundays with Richard Tice.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Here we are. Welcome to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. It's the 10th of April. It's just after 10 o'clock. And I'm back. I've had a week off. A massive thank you to Daisy McAndrew, who did a sterling job standing in for me last Sunday. But what a week has gone by, and another massive week ahead. So much to talk about. It might take 4 hours, not 3 hours, here on Tice Talk. We've got to talk about Boris's energy strategy. Hardly in the papers at all. I call it energy lunacy. Obviously, we've got to talk about Ukraine, the latest absolutely appalling horrors. Also talk about some brave volunteering going on. And today's a big day in France. Yes, the first round of the presidential elections. Is there a Brexit-style shock awaiting? I've got an exclusive discussion about the dangers of big battery energy storage systems that the renewable industry is so keen on. Another exclusive on what's going on in petrol stations today. How much fuel have you got in your car? What's going on in your local petrol stations? Call us, tell us. And also we've got to talk, of course, about another absurd non-job of the week. We've got some fantastic guests. We've got 2 MPs. And my big question for you, what do you think of Boris's energy strategy this week? And what's going on, as I say, at petrol stations near you? I want your input, your calls, please. 0344 499 1000 or text us 87222 using the word talk. Tweet at Talk Radio. Get involved. There's no excuse not to. And of course, you can watch us either on the app or on YouTube, Roku, Apple, Samsung, Amazon Fire. There's no excuse. You are listening this Sunday to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Yes, indeed, that wonderful organ music confirms that it is indeed Sunday, and it is time for my Sunday sermon. And before I start this week's Sunday sermon, 2 weeks ago, at my last Sunday sermon, it was all about Rishi Sunak being out of touch. And I think maybe I had some form of prescience, because given what's emerged, he was so out of touch that he didn't realise how inappropriate his wife's tax arrangements may be, even though they were completely, and indeed are, completely legal. But moving on to this week's Sunday sermon, we've got to talk about what is essentially the biggest problem we face here in the UK. Now, imagine if you've got a problem, well, you want to solve it. So the first thing you do is you say, well, what's the cause of the problem? And then you say, right, now how do we avoid the cause? How do we make sure we've got a solution so that it doesn't happen again? What you don't do is double down on the cause of the problem, because of course that would make it much, much worse. Now, our energy problems, we're all feeling it in our pocket. Bills are soaring and going to soar later this year. Our energy problem is that it's unaffordable and we're dependent on others. That's the problem. And the energy strategy this week identified the problem, but completely and utterly failed to identify the right solution. Indeed, worse than that, Boris Johnson proposes he's not going to double down on the cause of the problem. He's not even going to treble down on the cause of the problem. No, he's going to quadruple down on the cause of the problem. And that is the huge increase in renewables. Now, electricity prices have trebled in the 15 years to the end of 2020. Trebled. In that same period, the percentage of renewables, renewable generation of our electricity grew from essentially 0 to just under 30%. In that same 15-year period, that electricity prices trebled. Do you think that's a coincidence? Let me tell you, it's not. There is a direct link between the massive subsidies paid to the owners of the renewable wind farms and solar farms and Drax Power Station, mainly to foreign owners, including, by the way, the Danish government, who turns out to be the biggest investor in all of the offshore wind farms. Yes, if it's good enough for the Danish taxpayers, why are we sending our money there? Why aren't we using our own balance sheet? The total renewable subsidies every single year is now £10 billion and rising by, guess what? The rate of inflation. And we know what's happening to that, don't we? And then there's a load of additional hidden costs called balancing costs, transmission costs, constraint costs. That's another £5 billion a year and counting. This equates to about 500 quid per year per household, directly linked to subsidies on renewables, and they didn't exist before renewables existed. So we know there's a direct link. And what's Boris done? He's quadrupling down on offshore wind. Utterly unbelievable. Now, there might be some economies of scale as you load up, but basically, more renewables means more subsidies, more network costs, and the cost will go up and up. I'm going to be doing some work with some experts in the coming days and weeks on the forecast increase in costs. But in broad terms, I think in the next 5 years, from here, I think electricity prices could double. In the next 10 years, they could well treble if we carry on down Boris's proposed solution. I've said it before, we are just at Everest base camp of the net zero cost mountain, just at base camp. Now, the solution to make it much more affordable is, firstly, we've got to stop all of these new renewable subsidies. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to use the treasure under our feet that I've been talking about for weeks, the shale gas. Now, in fairness, I'm a fair guy. Boris's strategy does make a brief passing to shale gas. Yes, they stopped cementing the wells. That was good. And it says there's a sort of a 3-month review of the technology. I'm pretty sure that basically means that they don't want to proceed it. We should be using our shale gas. It's the fastest way to increase the supply of our own gas that will bring the price down. Now, at least Boris's energy strategy did agree to issue some more licenses in the North Sea for oil and gas, but it's probably at least 3 years minimum before any of that comes on stream. That's the same period for which you could get some shale gas on stream. And of course, offshore is much more expensive than onshore. The only really good thing about Boris's strategy was he agrees we need some more nuclear power stations. But it takes a decade, probably, to build the first one. There is one under construction at the moment, Hinkley Point C. It's due for completion in 2026. My prediction to you, based on what I'm hearing about the cost overruns and the delays, we'll be very lucky if that is open before 2030. So gas and nuclear are the only things that will bring prices down and create self-sufficiency. Because let's remember, the wind doesn't always blow. And I'm going to be talking later about the dangers of the renewable industry's solution to this. They think you need lots more batteries. Well, we'll be talking about batteries and their safety or otherwise a bit later. There's nothing in Boris's plan, short term, to deal with the cost of energy here and now. For the man who got Brexit done, he's failing to use one of the great Brexit opportunities, which is to cut VAT on domestic fuel to zero. He hasn't abolished the 25% levies, which he should do, which should be moved to general taxation. And that is, in my view, a disaster. He could have reduced the bills per house by £300 to £400 per year, and he and the out-of-touch Chancellor deliberately chose not to. So I recap. Let's just refresh on this. If you've got a problem, you identify the cause of the problem and you propose a solution to avoid the cause. What you don't do, what you never do, surely, is to double down or treble down on that very thing that caused the problem. And yet, that is exactly what Boris Johnson is doing with his energy strategy, and I think that it will unravel over the coming months, because I think the bills, sadly, are going to go up and up and up. They're already forecasting in October another 50% on the energy cap. It's not acceptable. And I'm saying that Boris Johnson, you're going to have to rethink. Your energy strategy is energy lunacy. Here endeth my Sunday sermon. Well, there we are. That's my Sunday sermon this morning. We've got to be talking about energy. And coming up after the break, I'm going to be talking to Dr. John Constable from the Renewable Energy Foundation, a real expert who understands the impact of these costs on all of our livelihoods. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio.
Accept no substitutes.
Access all arguments.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Free Speech Radio.
Shut up and listen.
We're on your side.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. It's a beautiful day outside here in central London. I hope it is with you too. But give us a call, 0344 499 1000. What's going on at your fuel stations? Can you get diesel? Do you need to queue for it? Or is it all okay? I'll be talking later in the show to Howard Cox from Fair Fuel UK about what may be or may not be going on with fuel availability and the likely pricing. But we need to focus on pricing and the cost of energy. My Sunday sermon clearly set out why I think Boris's energy strategy this week that's not got the coverage because of everything else that's going on. I think it's fundamentally wrong. I think it's quadrupled down on the problem. But let's talk to a real expert who understands all about these renewable subsidies and the overall cost of it. Dr. John Constable is the boss of the Renewable Energy Foundation and Energy Director at Net Zero Watch. John, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us on Tice Talk this Sunday morning. So we've got Boris's energy strategy. Very little really in the papers this morning or indeed yesterday because there's so much else going on. But it seems to me that he's really focusing even more on more wind turbines, offshore. There's obviously a huge row as to whether or not there could be onshore turbines. But these subsidies on these renewables, I mean, they have grown hugely, directly linked to the increase in electricity prices. So I'd be interested in your sort of explanation for all of us as to what are these subsidies and these other costs? How do they happen and how much are they really costing us?
Well, these subsidies, Richard, were introduced in the early 2000s by the Blair government to support renewable development. And at that time, they were relatively small. They've grown over the years until they're now well over £10 billion per year. Now, that's a total cost of living impact for household. Part of it hits your electricity bill, and about 2/3 of that cost actually hits general cost of living. So Tesco's has to pay more for its electricity, and therefore it pays more, of course, it charges more at the checkout for any goods that it sells. So these are general impacts right over the household economics. It's not simply on electricity, and it's a cost of over 10 billion a year at present, charged through electricity suppliers. So in effect, government made the electricity industry a tax collector to pay for its renewables policies. And those subsidies are necessary because renewable energy is very, very expensive. It's physically poor quality. It costs a great deal to collect and deliver it to consumers, and it'll never be cheap. It's physically impossible for it to be cheaper than fossil fuels, which are very high-grade fuels.
But John, we're hearing from Tory MPs that renewables now are even cheaper than gas, and that the latest bid in these latest auctions for new offshore wind licenses are really cheap. What's the truth? What are they missing there?
The renewables industry has played a market share acquisition policy here, that they have deceived the government about their true costs, and they've become a dominant industry as a result. So they now have a controlling position. Their actual costs are predicted from physics. We know what they're going to be expensive because of their physical qualities. And in fact, when you start looking at the audited financial statements of renewable energy companies, you find that the capital costs and the operational costs reductions that they claim are simply not there. They are still very, very expensive indeed. And of course, part of that cost shows up in the system management. Now, the electricity system has to be balanced on a second-by-second basis, and that's very expensive when you have a lot of renewables on it. Before renewables arrived on our system in the early 2000s, we were paying around about 300 to 400 million pounds a year to balance the electricity system. It's now well over 2 billion, and transmission costs are also rising. We're having to build more lines to actually integrate the system. So it's intrinsically expensive.
And so John, these extra costs, these balancing costs, these transmission costs, in order to essentially service the renewables, where do they appear on our bills?
They're not part of the subsidy. They're additional too. So these are avoided costs for the renewables industry. They're hidden in the overall costs of the system and therefore are concealed. And this is why many people don't really appreciate the full cost of a renewable system.
Exactly. So does that come through like our standing charges as opposed to the levies?
That's correct. Yes.
And so I think I'm right in saying that the standing charge that we're all paying has increased again hugely over the last 10 to 15 years, and it's a sort of hidden cost that no one thinks about.
Yes, so the additional costs of renewables, additional to the subsidies that are necessary to get a return on capital for the investors, are socialised over the entire system, and therefore they're nobody's problem, and they're hidden. As you say, they're concealed, in fact. Now, this is a significant problem, both technically, because when something isn't anybody's problem, it's in nobody's interest to actually solve it. But it also means that there's really almost no point in switching your supplier, because so many of the charges that are imposed on consumers are common to all suppliers. There's very little to choose between suppliers now, so the power of switching between them is very, very weak. There's hardly any market left in the electricity system.
Because essentially the bit that could vary is now a much smaller percentage of our overall bills. So this suggestion that we've got a competitive energy market
it's rubbish.
Is diminishing to the point, as you say, of
it's
rubbish.
Untrue.
And now, of course, these subsidies, they go up, don't they, every year by inflation. And how long are these subsidies? How long does it last? I mean, if we've got inflation of 7-8% and possibly rising, I mean, this is going to increase the cost even further.
Yes, many of the contracts have quite long lives, so 20-year contracts. Some of them are 15. And they will extend into the 2030s and 40s. And the Office for Budget Responsibility is predicting that the total subsidy burden for renewables will continue to rise for at least the next 5 to 6 years. Now, I suspect actually that it will continue to rise because the industry will come back and say, well, actually, we need even more. I know they will say they bid low, yes, but unfortunately, circumstances have changed. And now they need an additional kind of subsidy, a bailout in effect. Having gained market dominance through dishonest bids in the contracts for difference scheme, they will then ask for additional support because by that time, they hope that the UK will be dependent on renewables.
I mean, it's just absolutely shocking. Whilst we've been talking, John, I've got a tweet in here, and keep the tweets coming at Talk Radio. The lovely Mr. Tice talking about energy. I'm losing the will to heat anything. So, I mean, it's quite clear people really are suffering. And it just feels to me that you've got these huge hidden costs. And if they increase the number of wind farms, offshore wind farms, essentially the subsidies are going to increase again and again. Is that right?
Yes, I think so, because the cost for the industry is actually not falling. So they will require subsidies and they will find them indirectly. So government has introduced considerable pressures on companies to sign up to green tariffs. So these are corporate power purchase agreements, again, behind the scenes, and they will increase the cost of living. So it will seem that the industry is not subsidised, but in fact it will be indirect subsidised through pressure on commercial consumers to buy expensive renewable energy. This is all becoming very devious. I mean, government made a big mistake by revealing the size of the subsidies in the Office for Budget Responsibility accounts. And so we all know about them. And I was calculating them in the early 2000s myself. And you could see them growing rapidly there. Government's learned a lesson. It's learned that if it's going to subsidise a pet industry, it's got to hide the costs, and it's moving to hide the costs very cunningly, in fact.
So what would you... So, John, if you were essentially running this energy strategy, reporting to the Prime Minister, what would you do with the renewables, the renewable industry? What would you be recommending?
I would start winding them down immediately. I mean, we're actually quite dependent on them at the moment. If you took them all off at the moment, the system would actually fail, and we have become hooked. But we have to get them off the system over the next 5 to 15 years, gradually replace them with high-efficiency gas and certainly with new nuclear in the medium term. I don't think it's too early to start planning for coal generation as a backstop in case the nuclear plants don't come on stream on time. I know nobody else is talking about coal, but if we wish to remain a defensible and prosperous economy, we have to actually spread our bets, and betting purely on gas and nuclear is not wise. We need to have a third component, and clean coal is an option.
Because, of course, I mean, yes, the government's talked about increasing the number of, giving more gas licences in the North Sea, but that's going to take some time to come on stream. And this focus on renewables, of course, there's a problem, isn't there, when the wind doesn't blow, John? I mean, what's their solution to this?
Yes, it's naive to think that more renewables will reduce our gas dependency. In fact, it increases it. Gas is the only reliable fuel left on the system at the moment. The entire system hangs by a single thread. Renewables don't contribute anything to security supply. More of them actually makes you more vulnerable.
Exactly, because when the wind doesn't blow... Now, they're sort of saying, well, maybe we could have lots of big battery storage, these what they call the BESS systems. What do you think of that?
Incredibly expensive. Just incredibly expensive. The difficulty is that the economics of these systems means that they have to recover their costs from their charge-discharge cycles. There's only one macro cycle with renewables. It's winter to summer. You cannot afford to store from winter to summer, so you go down to shallower charge-discharge cycles. So in essence, the batteries can manage short-term fluctuations on the grid at considerable cost, but they cannot actually address the fundamental deficiency of renewables, which is that they're seasonally variable and indeed variable from year to year. Renewables vary considerably over all timescales, from seconds to decades. Batteries cannot address those kinds of macro fluctuations.
So that's potential. So if they go down the route of more renewables and start to build huge battery systems, then essentially what we're going to have is even more cost with these battery systems.
Correct, because the system becomes less and less productive. You have much more capital equipment and you're serving the same or indeed a smaller demand. So productivity falls, and in economics, very little is understood very well. But the one thing we really understand is that productivity is the key to growth. And a low productivity electricity system would be a disaster for Britain.
Now, and of course, the cost for businesses, we've got the domestic energy cap, but the cost for businesses is not capped. And so their costs are soaring. I mean, I'm hearing businesses saying, we don't know how we can keep open. If they don't keep open, then tragically people are going to lose their jobs, be laid off. The implications for our economy by these higher prices are potentially devastating.
Yes, the energy strategy has done nothing to help that. I mean, any international investor looking at the energy strategy would say, this is not a serious proposition. This is a wish list, incompatible technologies. There's no real planning here. And who would want to invest in a country where they're not serious about their energy system? And indeed, many businesses that are already here will be wondering whether they should relocate, because the future is so incoherently planned in this strategy.
I mean, it's just a devastating way to finish, John. Thank you so much for those thoughts, that actually businesses may not want to invest here, and in businesses here that are using lots of energy may want to relocate elsewhere in order to remain competitive. We know what that means for jobs. We know what it means for where our money goes. Dr. John Constable, thank you so much for that explanation about why he thinks that if we do more renewables, the cost will go up and up and up through not only inflation, but all of the additional balancing costs, transmission costs, and much more. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts. Maybe we've got it wrong. Maybe we should have more renewables, or tweet us at Talk Radio. Keep those calls coming in. Coming up later this hour, we're going to be talking to Tobias Ellwood MP about his thoughts on the latest in Ukraine. But I want to hear from you, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk here at the home of common sense, Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
World headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're well into the first hour of the show. I've been talking in my Sunday sermon and then to Dr. John Cunster about the cost of energy, the flaws, the huge flaws in the government's energy strategy that is going to cost us all dear in the weeks, the months and the years ahead. And I'm campaigning in order to change that. We've got a lovely tweet here from Shirley who says, rising and shining, listening to Richard Tice on Talk Radio with a cup of coffee and paying attention to the Sunday sermon, having a journalist who's so passionate about energy and our PM's energy strategy is important right now. Well, Shirley, I'm going to keep talking about it because this is hitting all of us right where it hurts, right in the pocket. And I think it's just something that the government is, in a sense, trying to sort of hide away. But who knows? I've got Lionel in Bromley with his thoughts. Morning, Lionel.
Hello, Richard. I think you all know the names of Case Construction and New Holland agricultural machinery.
I do indeed, absolutely, yes, very much so. Tell us about them.
We're not talking Mickey Mouse here.
No.
You will know Case Construction, the US company, similar to JCB. They make excavators. This is from their website. Case creates a breakthrough in sustainable construction as it reveals the world's first wheel loader which runs entirely on alternative and renewable fuel. It's powered by biomethane, which is produced by biodigesters from waste products such as waste food, wood chippings, animal waste. Biomethane is the most logical choice for the wheel loader. Then there's New Holland, another US agricultural machinery manufacturer. The New Holland T6 180 methane power.
I'll take your word on that description there, Lionel.
Well, this is what they say. The methane-powered production tractor is key to CO2 reduction without compromising performance. Farmers can make use of agricultural and animal waste to generate biomethane, which powers the tractor, which in turn helps grow the very crops. So there is an alternative.
There clearly are alternatives. Interestingly, Lionel, along those lines, JCB, Lord Bamford, the owner of the Bamford family, owner of the incredible product JCB, in today's Sunday Times, it refers to the fact his concern is that there's not enough focus on the opportunities for hydrogen. He is really promoting hydrogen, the opportunities that could also in lorries, in things like JCB, other machinery. What do you think of that?
Well, I have seen Lord Bamford on a YouTube video, Harry's Garage, and I've heard him actually say this. But I wonder why they're not going for biomethane, because hydrogen is very expensive one way or another. I mean, he's having to import it from Australia.
Yes, I mean, I think obviously the intention is that we would actually make what they call blue hydrogen or green hydrogen here in the UK. But Bamford's concern is that we're not investing enough fast enough and there's not enough government support for it.
Well, he's right in that case, but on a lot of things such as biofuels. I mean, why are his rival companies going for biomethane? And he's going for hydrogen.
Well, I think that actually, of course, the reality is, Lionel, that you want essentially diversity. You want competitive technologies because you don't know which ones at what will come forward at what price. That's why you've got to have a really broad range of investment in different technologies, surely.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. But unfortunately, biomethane seems to be overlooked. I heard Kevin O'Sullivan this morning with his guest say that people are not really looking at biomethane enough.
No, I think it's an interesting point, Lionel, and I'm learning about it fast. The question is, how much land does it consume in order to create enough of it? But it is.
No, it doesn't have to come from crops. It comes from things like sewage.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, at the moment, we're injecting raw sewage into our water systems instead of using it to make biofuel.
Well, Lionel, you're clearly promoting that. I think we've got to be looking at all of them, but we don't know how quickly they're going to come forward. In the interim, we've got a massive pricing crisis, and that's why the government should be cutting VAT and cutting the levies immediately. Thank you very much. That was Lionel in Bromley with his thoughts. Jim is way up north in Gateshead. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Richard. Yes, just quickly on your last caller, he's quite right, because we had a choice between VHS and Betamax. We went for VHS, which was the worst technology, and we had a choice between the water closet and the combustible toilet, and we went for the water closet, which is the more expensive option. So there you go. But what I was saying is, when you were talking to Dr. Constable there, is fantastically to mention coal again. We can use it, we can burn it cleanly now. We can do everything with it. And what I'd like to see is, like you say, the fracking, the coal industry, create high-quality jobs, increase your tax receipts, increase your productivity, increase the economy, force prices down again, and the economy will move forward.
So Jim, you mentioned there that coal can be burned cleanly compared to in the past, because the perception, that the view essentially is that coal is a dirty fossil fuel, the dirtiest. So just give us a bit of intelligence on why you say that it can be burnt cleanly.
Well, they brought it into smokeless fuel, didn't they? And they broke all the derivatives down out of it to make other products, because basically it's a carbon. And also, they were investing in technology for carbon capture, where it was put out into the sea and it dispersed slowly through into the ecosystem. Because ultimately, when they're going about carbon all the time, everything in this world is made of carbon. We're made of carbon. That's right. And actually, I'm beginning to really focus on the potential of carbon capture, because my view is, for example, that we can be extracting the shale gas treasure from under our feet. We can be using it for gas-fired power stations, and we capture the carbon that's emitted and put that back into the shale rocks near and buy those power plants. So you get a real win-win. You get cheap energy, domestically produced energy, and then you capture the carbon. Could I just mention one more thing, which is it's just a silly little thing, but it just brought back a memory from my mum, which was basically when you used to hang your washing out, and people were burning coal fires, it used to get dirty. Then she says that doesn't happen anymore because of the coke, which was a clean fuel, smokeless fuel. You didn't produce the soot and the dirt that it used to. Quite right. Well, Jim, that's very interesting. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Jim, that's Jim in Gateshead with his thoughts about the cost of energy and also the potential for cleaner coal to make a difference. And indeed, John Constable, he referred to coal. And I think the point is that if you've got new technologies, you've got carbon capture technologies, then actually we should be saying, well, what's the cheapest way to create our electricity, to create our the fuel that we use in our domestic gas boilers, for example, to generate it, to extract it, and then you say, okay, and then we can actually use carbon capture technology. Maybe we should be investing more in that than importing gas from overseas, with the huge increase in carbon that is emitted in liquefying the imported LNG and then regasifying it. So it just doesn't make any sense. But maybe you've got a different view. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. And I want to hear from you. I've got some tweets coming in here. One from Derek, who says that, listening to the energy discussion, how on earth does our government not listen to common sense? Why are they so determined to destroy the UK? Is it another EU ploy? Well, we've left the EU. I don't think it is, to be honest, an EU ploy. I think it's a combination of civil service and government ignorance, stubbornness, virtue signalling, and being completely out of touch with actually what's really going on up and down the country in tens of millions of households. And let's remember, of course, MPs very often don't have to pay for their energy costs in their second home, so they don't actually feel it in the same way that everybody else does. So
But let me have your thoughts. Of course, you can text us 87222. We're using the word talk. Now, coming up later in this hour, we're going to be going over to the issue of Ukraine. We're going to be talking to Tobias Ellwood, because the newspapers every day, the horrors, the shocking scenes that are clearly going on, they get worse and worse. And the question is, at what point is this going to stop? How is it going to stop? And what happens after that? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio. Unbelievably realistic.
Home of common sense.
Measured, mean, Machiavellian.
Non-complicated radio of a complicated age.
The People's Parliament.
Just like the real thing.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio, and we've been focusing so far in this first hour on energy, the energy strategy, but of course the newspapers are filled with the appalling horrors of what's going on in Ukraine. And as the Russian forces appear to be relocating more to the east, I sort of hesitate to use the word retreating, we need to understand what really is going on and what the future holds for Ukraine and the implications for all of us. And no one better to talk to than Tobias Ellwood MP for Bournemouth East and chairman of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. Tobias, a very good morning to you. So, obviously, the Prime Minister was in Kyiv yesterday meeting President Zelensky, and I mean, the scenes and the stories and the news seems to get worse and worse, the horrors that are being inflicted by Russian forces on civilians. And it seems a far cry from, we're hearing that some of the Russian troops were conscripts and didn't want to fight, and yet actually on the ground, the stories coming out appear almost exactly the opposite. The brutality. Has that brutality surprised you? And what do you think NATO should do now?
Yeah, well, these are the very, very big questions. I think, yes, the brutality has shocked the Western world, but in part, are we to blame for giving Putin the green light to conduct these activities? We've hidden behind that NATO curtain, if you like. We've not been willing to step up and support Ukraine. This conflict is now approaching day 50, We absolutely praise the courage of the Ukrainians, willing to hold their ground and fight, and we condemn the actions of Russia, not least those war crimes, the breaches of genocide, and so of the Geneva Convention. My question is, do we generally want to help Ukraine to win rather than just survive? And do we now appreciate the wider consequences of what will happen if Putin is successful here? Where will it go to next? It's good to see the penny is dropping. I really much welcome the Prime Minister's visit. He would have learned more by that visit, hearing directly from the Ukrainian President Zelensky. The Ukrainian people will be absolutely boosted by by Boris Johnson's arrival in Kiev. Don't forget, it was Britain that gifted weapon systems prior to the invasion, one of the few countries to do that. We did so afterwards, but there's still been this timidity, if you like, of NATO not wishing to cross a threshold between defensive and offensive weapons. So I'm pleased to see that we are now breaking away from the pack, joining a couple other nations, Poland, Czech Republic, and so on, getting those T-72 tanks, APCs, anti-ship missiles into Ukraine, because only then can we actually start to provide the support that Ukraine's required to push Russia back.
And Tobias, you were calling, actually, before the war, you were calling for a NATO division to be in Ukraine to act as a much bigger deterrent. Obviously, that didn't happen. If it's true that actually the Russian forces are essentially regrouping and going to be focusing on the Donbass region, what do you think NATO do? Would you advocate, for example, the no-fly zone? Would you advocate NATO going in to protect Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine in order to show Putin that actually NATO now really does mean business?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that what we could have done prior to the invasion itself. NATO quietly is regretting not doing more, recognizing really that the role Ukraine plays in our lives. The reason why energy, fuel prices, you've just been discussing that, and food prices are going up in this country is because of what's happening in Ukraine. And we could have prevented all this by putting a force into Ukraine, supporting exactly what President Zelensky was asking for. The one thing Putin respects, is this capability of NATO. He takes advantage of weakness. He exploits that, but he respects strength. And we have the biggest, most formidable, potent, military alliance in the world. And essentially, they're sitting on the bench on the other side of the Ukrainian border. And you're touching on something very important. The Russian forces are not somehow withdrawing. They're regrouping. They're rearming. They're remobilizing. Their new leadership is coming in. And, look at Russian history. They learn fast. They'll be moving around to the Donbass area that you mentioned, and also to Odessa, the port of Odessa in the south of the country. If that falls in the way Mariupol did, then Ukraine becomes landlocked, and that really would affect the Ukrainian economy, really would affect European security, and who knows where Putin will go next.
So what would you want NATO to do? In a sense, if the fighting focuses even more in the Donbass region and around Odessa, and if Russia start to win there, do you think they might then essentially turn back towards the centre and the west of Ukraine unless we do something more?
Well, there's a limit as to what Russia can actually control in the aftermath, if you like. And the further west you go, they stop speaking Russian, they're speaking Ukrainian. And so there'll be a limit as to what they actually want to control. Their purpose, in my view, is to create a buffer zone between the growth of NATO and the EU, if you like, between that and Russia itself, but also to increase Russian influence, return back to that Soviet era, when there was Moscow was very much in control of the Slavic part of Europe, and that's where he wants to head. So we should be putting forces into Moldova now, boosting forces into Georgia, letting Sweden and Finland join NATO immediately, and as well as I think the Prime Minister has alluded to, provide the weapon systems, the hardware that Ukraine requires today, rather than further debates about whether we should or should not do these sort of things.
So interestingly, Tobias, just as we've been speaking, I've just had a tweet in with a different view, which says the whole point is NATO should stay out of Ukraine. Ukraine was meant to be neutral, and indeed, I think as part of the ceasefire discussions, there was obviously the question mark of Ukraine's whether it essentially withdraws its application to join NATO and remains neutral. What are your thoughts on that observation?
Well, I fear we're going down the 1938 role here. If we agree to this, this is Ukraine's moment of need, and we should try and support that. This is, as I say, much wider than just about Ukraine itself. And if we don't support Ukraine, where will Putin go next? And that's the biggest concern. So any person I can understand would want the hesitance. Do you really want to go up against somebody with nuclear weapons? But that's where we need to be better at understanding, assessing, and taking calculated risk, knowing that there is that escalatory ladder, that things could, ratchet out of control. But we did it well during the Cold War. Look what happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We need to rekindle that statecraft that we had in those days.
I think this is the big question. I think the pressure will grow on Western leaders, Boris Johnson, on NATO itself, on the EU, and indeed on the rather silent President Joe Biden, who seems to be nowhere on this at the moment. But as the horrors emerge, I think the pressure will grow. Could we also just touch on the prospects of the negotiations of a possible ceasefire deal? That seems to have gone a little bit quiet. What do you think is going on there? Or do you think that actually, in a sense, given the horrors that unfold, that will be almost impossible?
I don't believe there's any merit in having these discussions. They're simply used by Russia, and it's been proved in the last 40 days or so. But every time there are these discussions, a potential ceasefire or humanitarian corridor put in, that Russia simply uses this opportunity to regroup its own forces, but actually fires on the various towns and civilians and so forth during those ceasefires themselves. They are absolutely worthless. If I may, I just want to step back from Ukraine itself and say, where is global security going? Because after Afghanistan, both China and Russia realized how weak the West had become. There is a Russia-China axis, which is very, very real indeed. China is exploiting, wanting to utilize this war to hasten America's inevitable decline, which is going to happen over the next 2 or 3
I agree.
decades.
Tobias, I agree entirely. I've talked on a number of occasions on my show about what I view as an axis of communist evil between Russia and China, which is potentially really, really significant. And as you say, essentially, the West has got to stand up about that. You touched also earlier on essentially the Ukraine trying to win. What does victory look like? And surely the worse it gets for Putin, the more he's essentially going to presumably and terrifyingly try to flatten much of Ukraine.
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, initially the Russians anticipated walking into eastern Ukraine and being received, welcomed, if you like, as liberators. And clearly that didn't happen. And so they've now changed tactics to actually pummel cities, to actually wreck them so that the population depart, that they actually leave the entire country in their millions. And of course, Mariupol, which doesn't exist anymore, is a lot easier to control now that population is completely dispersed. So that makes it much, much easier for Russia to then take control of that. If we, from a success perspective for Ukraine, we need to be able to push this back to their original sovereign borders. And that will require real effort. But I go back to this point. If we don't support Ukraine in this moment of need, it will not stop here, because
I get that.
I cannot stress enough that this Russia-China axis is developing.
Just before we finish, one final question for you, Tobias. As and when there is some end to this horrific war, in a sense, I can see that very quickly people will be saying, well, we can start to ease the sanctions. What's your view about the sanctions? I mean, my feeling is that they should remain in place and get tighter as long as Putin is in charge.
Oh, completely. And we need to make sure that the Russian people, the elite, Kremlin, the generals as well, recognize there's no return for Russia to the international community as long as he stays in power. It'll be for them then to realize that to draw a line, they need to remove him. And you're exactly right. These sanctions need to ratchet up. They need to go further and further. My concern is, and I'm sorry to go back to this again, that because of this deal that Russia and China has, China will be supporting Russia to mitigate all the the impact of the sanctions. So oil and gas, they're going to mop up all that. That's exactly what China needs. Military kit, they'll buy all that as well in exchange for One Belt, One Road support and so forth. Technology, they're moving into space weaponization. They're developing a strengthened bond, which is going to dominate, I'm afraid, international security for the next 3 or 4 decades. What we do now in the next weeks and months will determine how the next few decades play out.
It is so difficult. I'm with you, but actually, it's interesting listening. I've had another tweet in whilst we've been talking, Tobias. There's concern supplying arms just kills more innocents and prolongs the war. So this is part of the debate, and we have to win over the public on this.
We do, and it's so important to be able to explain why we need to use force occasionally to defend democracy, to defend the international standards and values that actually previous generations have fought boldly to defend as well.
Tobias,
that's that moment again.
It is, sadly, tragically. Tobias Ellwood, thank you so much indeed, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, with his thoughts on the current status of the Ukraine war. Coming up into the second hour, we're going to be talking about the French presidential elections, the first round today. Stay with us. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Mid-morning talk.
Sunday Talk.
Talk Radio.
Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Talk Radio. Richard Tice. Sunday morning devotion, there isn't a sermon.
Talk Radio's Common Sense Weekend.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
And welcome back to Tice Talk. We have flown into the second hour of my 3-hour show. We've got great guests still to come up and some amazing tweets coming in as well. One here from Phil says, thank you for exposing the renewable energy con. Sadly, there are too many self-interested businessmen like Dale Vince who peddle their green zealotry with little challenge. Well, certainly, I have to say, there are some massive vested interests in the green lobby, the green industry, who are making vast sums of money. What really concerns me about the wind farms, the offshore wind farms in particular, is the majority of the owners of those wind farms are big overseas foreign multinational businesses and indeed governments who are making fortunes at our expense. So you're taking money from the lowest paid, the least well-off British families, and we're giving it to rich, wealthy foreign investors. How does that make any sense whatsoever? I don't know, but maybe Daniel in Surrey has got a view on this. Daniel, good morning.
Oh, hi, Richard. My point was more about Rishi Sunak and the way the media have sort of led him up the garden path, and now have kind of dropped him, because there was so much talk about Rishi Sunak might be the next leader of the Conservative Party, and I can let everyone into a little secret. He was never going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party ever. So much so that the membership would never vote for him. They're notorious, as you know, Richard, for voting for the most right of centre candidate, because the membership of the Conservative Party and most of the electorate want the tough right-wing Conservative Party that we voted for and that we currently haven't got. So all this talk about, he would have been the next Prime Minister, he wouldn't have been, ever. So I think we need to kind of grasp that nettle, Richard.
Interesting. Well, he certainly has gone from hero just a few months ago with the furlough scheme to zero, really, in just a few weeks. I mean, interesting comments about whether or not he would have, do you not even think he would have got to the last two had there been a leadership challenge?
I don't know. I mean, why is he a hero for the furlough scheme? I mean, what I'm hearing when you say that, or when people say that as well, is you've just burdened my kids with £2 trillion worth of debt. You know, that's not a hero. You squandered billions of that to fake companies with a random Hotmail.
I mean,
account.
I'm the furlough scheme. It was way too generous and it lasted too long, and the waste and the fraud and the corruption that's gone on is absolutely horrific. No question about it.
But I mean, should we have even locked down? Well, was a sensible approach to let the bulk of your workforce, who were virtually unaffected, had a more chance of drowning every year than dying of COVID. So your people are under 55 that are basically in no danger at all. We should have let them continue with the economy, the bulk of your workforce, and everyone else who's worried, you can lock down and get your vaccines if you want to.
Well, Daniel, of course, there are new studies. There's the John Hopkins study that's come out a few weeks ago, actually saying exactly that lockdowns turned out, as many of us thought at the time, to be the wrong strategy. I was concerned after about a fortnight.
Yeah, no, totally, man. It was obviously the wrong strategy, extremely expensive. But just to everyone listening out there who believes the kind of media hype, Richie was going to be our new PM, there's no way the membership. He might have got down to the last couple, but I certainly wouldn't have voted for him, and no other Conservative I know would either.
So you're obviously a Conservative member. Dan. Who would you, if there is a leadership election? Well, I have to say, I think that's now a highly remote prospect. But if there was, who would you have voted for?
Do you know what? I really did such a difficult question, because I think the person that should get it comes from left field. Someone like a true Conservative, someone who isn't this weak upper middle class, kind of centrist. I want to be led by lions, people that are on the right, that can run a tough right-wing government, tough on law and order, the economy absolutely booming.
So let's be clear, that's not Boris Johnson then?
It's not, is it? Because he's weak on immigration. We've been telling him we've been telling him forever. We need to sort out law and order and immigration.
But of course, he's called President Zelensky a lion. Maybe he should learn from him.
Maybe you should. I mean, Zelensky, I don't know much about him as a politician, only what I see on the news. But I want to be led by someone on the right, someone tough, someone who means what they say, not like Boris, a real Conservative. Perhaps someone like Steve Baker or from from the new crop of young MPs from up north, someone who means what they say, because bring in someone who's young, hungry, who's actually on the right and wants to run a tough right-wing government, and I reckon they win by a landslide.
Okay. Daniel, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Daniel in Surrey with his views that Rishi Sunak would never have made leader of the Tory party if there had been a leadership election. I don't think there will be now for some time to come because of Boris's performance through this Ukraine war. Now, I'm hoping that my next guest is available to talk about what's going on across the channel in France, because today is it's the first round of the French presidential elections, and there could be a shock for everybody, because it looks like Marine Le Pen is much closer in the polls to President Macron than was originally envisaged. And I've got a journalist and specialist in French current affairs, Alexander Seal, who is hopefully with me now. Alexander, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining Tice Talk. So this is a really big, important day for everybody in France and indeed across the EU. Who's the next French president? It seems the polls have made it much, much closer between Macron and Le Pen. What's really going on?
Yes, it's not like in 2017 when the gap was quite far away between Macron and Le Pen. I think Le Pen is trying to attract young voters because she wants, for example, one of her economic policies is to, for example, to remove the income tax for French workers, young French workers, and allow them to work in France, for example. And she also says that she's not, she doesn't want to leave the EU, but her opponents say that Marine Le Pen wants to leave the EU. The thing is that there's another far-right candidate called Éric Zemmour, and he normalized Marine Le Pen. So that's the situation.
So he's essentially done her a favour by making her look moderate compared
favorable. Absolutely, yes.
That's fascinating, and it's fascinating that that the young are now apparently in the polls turning to Le Pen, the exact opposite of 5 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And lots of young people also want to also vote for the far left candidate called Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And it's quite interesting because according to some latest polls, most French people don't want a Le Pen presidency, but most people don't want a Macron presidency. So it's quite interesting. They want a change of president, but they want also a different.
But there's something doesn't. Alexander, something doesn't compute there. If you say most people don't want, and yet the reality is they're the two front runners, so that sort of infers that most people are going to vote for what you're saying they don't want.
It depends on some regions which candidate will come higher. And for example, in the Bourgogne region, Macron comes in third place. So I'm in Nice, for example. So we'll have to wait until tonight if Macron will he come in first or second place. We don't know.
And just remind us how the process works, because it's very different to other parliamentary and presidential elections.
There are 12 candidates at the moment, and so the two candidates get the top scores, for example, above the 20s, qualify for the second round. That's on the 24th of April. And in between the two rounds, there's a debate on the 20th of April between the two candidates. So between Le Pen and Macron, or between Le Pen and someone else, we don't know. We'll have to wait until tonight.
And what time are you expecting the result out tonight?
So the exit polls will be at 8 p.m. this evening, French time. And
when do polls close? At 8 p.m.?
The polling stations close at 7 p.m.
At 7 p.m. Okay. And are your exit polls generally quite accurate?
They are generally quite accurate. But in 2002, no one knew that Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine Le Pen's father, was going to come in second round against Chirac. But normally the polls are quite accurate, yes.
And so your prediction is what, Alexander?
my prediction, I think, is Emmanuel Macron, Marine Le Pen, but we don't know because many people are angry with Emmanuel Macron because of his with most policies But if there is a Marine Le Pen president, for example, Marine Le Pen is elected president, it'll be a big surprise, and it'll be a big break in the EU because
it would indeed. So, what's the impact of that?
Let's like to be allies with Vladimir Putin, for example, and it'll be a big break with Macron, who wants to help Ukraine, for example.
Are you suggesting that Marine Le Pen would not want to help Ukraine?
Yes, I am suggesting that because she is wants to have an alliance with Vladimir Putin, and
really?
There are several candidates in this election. The far left candidates Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Éric Zemmour, and Marine Le Pen, who are pro-Russia, and there are a few candidates: Emmanuel Macron, the Green Party candidate Yannick Jadot, and the left-wing candidate Anne Hidalgo, who are against Vladimir Putin.
So what has Le Pen said in recent weeks on the Ukraine war?
Well, she doesn't say that what Vladimir Putin did, what Russia did in Bucha, for example, in Ukraine, she doesn't think they're war crimes at all. So she wants to really have an alliance with Russia. As you know, in 2014, she borrowed money from a Russian bank, and there are pictures of her in the past with Vladimir Putin. She met with him several times, and so
what you're really suggesting is that if she's elected, you're talking a seismic political shockwave across the whole of the EU and indeed possibly the Western world.
With the EU, yes, and with a break with the world. We have to wait and see if she's elected. But my prediction is Emmanuel Macron will be re-elected because what he's doing right now in France, I think a few French people would like stability and continuity, I think.
Sure. Alexander, thank you so much indeed for your thoughts on the first round of the presidential elections, what might happen over the next couple of weeks until the second round between the top two. That's Alexander Searle from France with his thoughts on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts, your questions, your views this Sunday morning on Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
recipe ever. Talk Radio.
Captivating, campaigning, controversial.
Powered by common sense.
May cause mild irritation.
The word on the street.
Standing up for the little guy.
Rewire your thinking.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We're well into the second hour there. We were just talking about what may happen in the French elections, the presidential elections. Today is the first round. The top two go through, and then the next fortnight they debate. There's more discussion, and then in 2 weeks' time there is a second round. And it looks as though it's going to be very much closer than people predicted. Well, we need to come back home and talk about what's going on with fuel prices, the availability of fuel. I've just had a message here that's come in. A climate activist from Just Stop Oil has criticised the police after being arrested. I was arrested the other day. I'm frightened. I don't want to get hurt. Well, maybe you shouldn't glue yourself to the middle of the road in parts of what I call our critical national infrastructure, which is oil and diesel and petrol coming in and out of our oil refineries. And frankly, you should be arrested because you shouldn't be essentially obstructing, as I say, what is part of our critical national infrastructure. But maybe I've got that wrong. Maybe I'm being too harsh on these nice protesters and the right to protest and all of that. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by Howard Cox from the Fair Fuel campaign, because when I was driving yesterday, I noticed that many petrol stations were shut or had very few pumps open, or indeed some of those pumps were closed off. And then I saw queues, and I'm wondering what's going on. And maybe Howard can give us an answer as to what is the status with the availability of diesel. Howard, a very good morning to you. What is going on out there?
Morning, Richard. Very nice to be on your show. Yeah, it's simple. These small number of eco-zealots are stopping the fuel supply chain. And what's really galling for people is, why aren't the police stopping this completely? They are doing a fair number of arrests. That's fair comment. And I feel sorry for that poor lady or poor person who got arrested just now. Oh, it's terrible. I expect they actually drove off in their fossil-fueled car as well afterwards. The fact is, Richard, is that the Priti Patel is not telling the police to protect our fuel supply chain. We had that problem before Christmas, didn't we, when we had the HGV shortages, and we couldn't get Grant Shapps or most of the MPs off our airways telling us about the no need to panic. Now it's deafening by their silence. We're not hearing a thing, and yet I've got something like 2,000 emails in the last 5 or 6 days and communiques saying I can't get any diesel. It's all closed off. And is it just diesel that's the issue? And is there any link there, Howard, to obviously the fact that we get quite a lot of diesel, I think about 18% from Russia, and maybe some of those ships have been stopped from coming to the UK. So how much of it is the protesters, and how much of this potential shortage or current shortage is because of the Russia issue? The Russia issue is it's minuscule. It's not very much at all. I mean, you're right, 18% of diesel, and it does put pressure on, mainly the pressure on prices for speculators to actually put prices up, scaring us because of that supply from Russia, scaring us about that issue. But in terms of actually petrol and diesel, it's simply the depots around the country are being blockaded by a bunch of idiots who have got no idea that what we do in this country in terms of actually stopping fossil fuel development, which is what they're trying to campaign against. And it's a laudable aim in the long term, I accept that, but this is not the way to help the economy or help people in a very severe cost of living crisis. But we had all of this with Insulate Britain, that were gluing themselves to the middle of roundabouts and traffic junctions and the like. And we were told then by the government that they were bringing in new rules and regulations and guidance for the police so that they could stop that. So to what extent are the police properly enforcing that? Or it sounds like actually they're not. And if not, why not? Well, exactly. That's the question we put out. I've written to most MPs today, and I've written to Priti Patel yesterday, asking exactly that. Why are you not protecting our absolutely essential fuel supply chain? The impact on our economy is incredible. What are you doing about it? This government is inept in managing our economy. We all see that at the moment, and particularly in terms of our fuel supply chain. And so we've got potential shortages of diesel, from what you're saying, from what I saw yesterday. And the pricing, I mean, I saw diesel being charged at £1.91 in Oxfordshire, £1.91 a litre. So if this goes on for more than a day or two, Howard, it's going to soar over £2 a litre in a heartbeat. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the other side of the argument that's at the moment, this opportunistic profiteering in the fuel supply chain. We're looking at a situation where in the fuel supply chain, they're making 300% more profit on the pence per litre for diesel and something like 200% more for petrol. That 5p cut in fuel duty, which is 6p with VAT on it, hasn't even hit the motorist yet. It hasn't come down. And yet oil has fallen this month by 30%. This is what the government must get on top of and introduce that body that I'm campaigning very hard for with backbench MPs, Pump Watch. We need somebody that looks at independent pricing or how we actually arrive at those prices, because no one has a clue what happens when oil goes up, comes down, what we'll pay at the pumps. No one is given that equation, how it's worked out. Let's have some transparency, and the government could put that in place now.
Well, there's obviously a reason why they don't. I mean, when I was driving yesterday, I saw literally just a few miles down the road a 15 pence per litre difference in the price of diesel. And it seems to me that, as you say, I mean, just forget the Chancellor's 5p a litre tax cut. I mean, prices are going up by 5 pence a week, not down.
Well, it is sickening. As I say, oil is around about $100 at the moment. We hit $140 earlier in March, so it's come down $40 in less than a month, and yet we're not seeing it at the pumps. The CEBR, the Centre for Economic Business Research, predict we should be getting 8p fall in prices, plus the 6p. We should be seeing 14 pence less at the pumps now. Why isn't the government checking on this? Why? What are they scared of?
Well, I think probably what they are doing is enjoying actually the increase in tax revenues, because, of course, the higher the price, the higher the VAT, and so it goes on. And so clearly the Chancellor, who's under a bit of pressure at the moment, in a sense, he and the Treasury are sort of quietly rubbing their hands with glee. They don't seem to care.
Well, you're absolutely right. They've got $3 billion of extra VAT because of the high prices in the last 12 months. And that's equivalent to something like a 9p fall in fuel duty. They gave us 5p fuel duty. But this government could be so much popular, particularly in the rural areas, their heartlands, because that's where pump prices are at their highest. And if they put this body in place and actually sat on these fuel supply chain profiteering businesses, we could actually, they would actually waltz the local elections if they got that sorted out now.
Interestingly, in the interest of transparency, contrary to what I've been saying, Tony has just tweeted in saying, how irresponsible are you trying to start another fuel shortage? I travel around this country for work and haven't seen any pumps shut off, let alone garages closed and in a no queue. So that's obviously a very different perspective from what I saw in one part of the country. But you're getting emails from all over the country.
It's very patchy, it is, but it's very prevalent in the Midlands, across to Norfolk and down to the southeast. And I'm now hearing it's much more in the West Country and Plymouth. I think the north, above the Midlands, Nottingham and above, I think is actually not such a problem at the moment. But most of the fuel blockages are actually taking place below the Midlands, and that's why we're seeing this problem.
So if the link is directly to the fuel blockades, then actually the answer is very simple, which is to ensure that the blockades... I mean, they should be protesting on the side of the road. I'm in favour of the lawful right to protest, but let people should do it on the side of the road, not in the middle of the road.
You're absolutely right. I mean, protesting, I'm a great believer. I could actually engage loads of hauliers. If you remember the 2,000 blockades of oil tankers and things, which the police did stop that happening. They got stuck in there and prevented and carted tanker drivers and all sorts of people away and lorry drivers away. But now they're just sitting. Every time I see the television, I see them talking to these protesters who are sitting, completely stopping tankers getting out to actually supply us with fuel. They're just having a chinwag with them. They're not dragging them off and, as you said, putting on the side to protest. And let them protest there.
And let's just look at the objectives of these people, sort of just stop oil or end fossil fuels now. So they literally want to stop using it tomorrow. Well, what's the impact of that? If we had no fossil fuels, no gas usage tomorrow, let me tell these people what would happen. Thousands and thousands and thousands of elderly people would die within weeks and months from the cold, from not having any heating or hot water.
Richard, you've got it spot on. The myopic view of this, of trying to protest. Yes, we all want cleaner fuel. I've heard you talking earlier about hydrogen and biomethane, all laudable things. Let's work together and let technology choose how we generate our electricity and gas and fuel our vehicles. Don't let emotive claims, because this is one statistic which I keep saying, but no one is taking on board. In the last 10 years, the haulage industry has halved its emissions because they've moved from Euro 5, Euro 4 to Euro 6. And at the moment, because of this policy that we have to buy electric vehicles and not buy new petrol and diesel by 2030, Euro 6 is not becoming Euro 7 or Euro 8. We've got 100 years of oil in the soil. Let's clean it up and get it out of there and work together for a better planet, not on the basis of conflict and polarised vision of our future.
I mean, I think these people are deeply irresponsible with what they're doing, and actually it's the poorest and the most vulnerable and the elderly who really are going to suffer the most from their actions as prices go up and as they have this impact on the whole sort of green debate. I think it's absolutely appalling.
Well, Rishi Sunat and Priti Patel, it's in your power and remit. One is to control the fuel supply chain supply, and Rishi to actually control the opportunistic profiteering. Get that right, it would help everyone in the cost of living and help those people, particularly in terms of actually trying to heat their homes. And I'm so with you on this, Richard. It is sickening what they're doing to our country.
Howard, thank you so much indeed. Keep up the good work. That's Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, with his thoughts and concerns about the impact of what the protesters are doing on the supply of fuel to our pumps and indeed the cost of fuel. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, what you're seeing, hearing and experiencing out there on the streets, in the regions, wherever you are. Coming up, we're going to be talking about battery storage, lots of other things. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio. Common sense radio for common sense people.
Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Well, the tweets are coming in, and indeed, give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts on the energy crisis or indeed anything else. This tweet, I think, is not very unifying, but I'll read it out. So if, in fact, the fuel crisis is mainly in the south, should we build a hard border at Watford Gap to enable us northerners to keep out the troublemakers? That's not very friendly, is it? Meanwhile, Robert says we should cut VAT and green taxes. That's all they need to do. They could cut VAT. They cut VAT during the pandemic. Why won't they do it now? They seem completely bent on hitting the less well-off intentionally. And as Martin Lewis said, there'll be civil unrest on the streets. Well, there's some big issues. I've been talking about them earlier in the show, about the government's energy strategy and about the sort of the continuing quest to not double down, not treble down, but to quadruple down on offshore wind farms, renewables. And as I've consistently said, that's all sounds well and good, but A, it's a lot more expensive, and B, what happens when the wind doesn't blow? Well, often you get the answer to that. Oh, we can build lots of battery storage and these huge things called battery energy storage systems, and that all sounds well and good. But I want to talk now about why actually that could be very dangerous indeed, properly dangerous, because in September 2020, in Liverpool, in the middle of the night on the 15th of September, there was an explosion and a big fire in what looked like an innocent sort of shipping container with some air conditioning on top. It turns out that actually is what's called a battery energy storage system. And it's about the size of a shipping container, and there were 3 of these alongside each other, and the Liverpool Fire Service, Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, they attended. It didn't take them an hour to put it out. It didn't take them 4 hours to put it out. It took 2.5 days to put out the fire in these battery energy storage systems. 2.5 days. And I think that's extraordinary. And it's taken the Merseyside and Fire Service 18 months to produce the report into what went wrong. Now, that feels to me quite a long time. And I want to know what is going on, because those on the green side, they think these battery energy storage systems are the answer. And yet, actually, it turns out when this report came out into what happened at this storage system, the answer was, we don't know. We don't know why it caught fire, why it exploded, and we don't know the cause. And I think if we're going to be building a lot more of these, I think we need to know whether they are safe or not. And indeed, this report also said that the fire suppression system, the automatic fire suppression system, guess what? When there was a fire, it didn't work. It failed. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Edmund Fordham, a physicist and engineer in the energy industry, to talk about this. Edmund, very good morning to you. And you sort of highlighted this to me, and you've really explored and understood this whole system. So tell us, how significant is this? I mean, if it's taken them 18 months, which sounds an incredibly long time to investigate this fire, why didn't they find the cause? And have there been any fires elsewhere, either in the UK or elsewhere in the world, of these storage systems?
Okay, well, good morning, Richard, and thanks for having me on the show. The answer to your question is yes, there have been plenty of these fires and explosions across the world. 20-odd such fires in South Korea alone. We've seen recently fires and explosions in Beijing. There have been at least 2 in Arizona. There was a large battery system in California taken offline recently. We've seen fires in a large battery system in Australia. So all of these fires and major industrial accidents are now, frankly, matters of record. It's not speculating about something that could happen. They have happened. As to the delays in the Liverpool report, we asked by FOI for a copy of the report at the end of 2020, and we were told that it would be available sometime in the new year. Now, that's new year 2021. So this report has been delayed for well over a year. And I don't really believe that it's just the difficulty of analysing the accident and what went on.
So an FOI stands for Freedom of Information Request for my listeners. So it took until March 2022, 18 months later. They haven't found the cause. Now, can we just touch on, I mean, obviously this is essentially a potentially significant, dangerous piece of plant equipment. Presumably the Health and Safety Executive, which oversees industrial premises and things, presumably they're involved, and what have they got to say about it?
Well, in respect of Liverpool, they did send an inspector to the site, I think in the shortly after the accident had happened. A copy of that inspector's memo, really, site visit report, has been released by the HSE. They've also sent a letter to the inquirers saying the case is now closed and no further investigations will be undertaken, which I find quite extraordinary.
Well, I did actually ask the Health and Safety Executive and indeed the Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service if they would come on the show to talk about it, and they've all declined the invitation, citing various excuses. But Edmund, I've actually just had a tweet in here from Ian, and I think this is something that you want to talk about. The problem with battery fires is if you take away the oxygen, they still burn. You can only cool them. So just tell us about what actually that means.
So, I mean, the tweet's absolutely correct. What is going on in these lithium battery accidents is a phenomenon called thermal runaway. You only need a failure in one cell to overheat, and then it will simply cook up the neighbouring cells, and then they will break down. And they don't really have to get that hot for that to happen. The temperature at which that happens can be as low as 150 degrees Celsius, which really isn't that hot. And once that happens, you've got a self-sustaining chemical reaction that simply does not need air to proceed. It's not a fire in the conventional sense at all. So any kind of fire suppression system which seeks simply to smother the so-called fire and stop air getting to it is going to be 100% useless. And it's even possible to argue that they would make matters worse, and that certainly seems to have happened in the Arizona incident in 2019, because all that happens if you try to put a blanket on it is it allows more and more inflammable gases and vapors to build up. And then when the inevitable happens, it does mix with air, hits a hot surface, you've got yourself a big explosion. So actually,
what you're really saying, I touched on the fact the fire suppression system failed. You're slightly inferring that it's the wrong type of suppression system, and therefore, in a sense, thankfully, it did fail.
I think you could well argue that it was probably a good thing that it failed.
Goodness
me. If you read the reports, it did in fact trip in once the explosion had happened, and it was probably the blast that actually triggered the operation of the fire suppression system. But it's completely useless. Smothering the air is no help to you at all if it doesn't need air in the first place.
So it seems to me that maybe we don't know enough about these systems, Edmund, because why would they design a automatic fire suppression system that actually is the wrong type of system to put it out in the first place?
I don't know the answer to that question, Richard. I really don't. It beats me. I think it's something that the fire services up and down the land need to educate themselves on really rather urgently, because we've seen many planning applications go in locally where fire services have been consulted and they've said, OK, we're happy with this type of fire suppression system.
And so the impact... So the impact, the bigger picture impact I just want to talk about, Edmund, is, those who love renewables, who want lots of wind turbines and solar parks covering thousands of acres of our glorious agricultural land, they're saying, well, that's fine when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. You can store it in huge battery storage systems alongside. What's the big picture impact if actually these battery storage systems may not be as safe as we're being told?
Well, you've got to remember that the volumes and the quantities of energy storage in batteries that would be required to make that happy scenario actually work would be absolutely colossal. And the example that I'm familiar with locally, which is in the Cambridgeshire-Suffolk borders, is the so-called Sonica Scheme. And this is a colossal solar farm proposal the size of Newmarket and Exning put together. And it includes enough land allocated for what on Energy Institute planning guidance could be as much as 3,000 megawatt hours of energy storage capacity. Now that is colossal compared to what we had at Liverpool. Liverpool was a small battery, and nevertheless it produced a huge bang and a fire that took several days to put out. And if you take some rough estimates, it's probably maybe 5 megawatt hours of energy storage that basically went up in smoke ultimately. So that's only 5. It's a small battery compared to what we're looking at in the Sonica plant.
So it seems to me that we're potentially going down a route of building huge battery storage systems, and yet even the fire service, they don't actually know how to deal with them. They're putting in the wrong type of fire suppression systems, and we're essentially we're quadrupling down on what actually could be really very dangerous indeed. I mean, how big is this potentially? The one in Sonica you've just mentioned, how big might that be compared to the energy released in the explosion in Beirut in Lebanon, for example?
Well, that's a comparison I've put into one of the papers that I've written on this with a couple of other physics experts. The Beirut explosion in 2020 was estimated by Sheffield University as about 0.5 kiloton of TNT, and that's about 600 megawatt hours. So what we're talking about in the Sonica plant is 3,000 megawatt hours. So that's 5 times the energy that was let loose in the Beirut explosion.
We're not saying that would all go up, but the point is we're
not
talking...
Not at once. It wouldn't go up at once.
But we're talking about huge quantities of energy being stored, and
Correct.
Yet actually we are just at the... we're at the tiny foothills of knowledge about the dangers of what may be being built and how you actually put them out. I mean, you mentioned Arizona earlier on. A number of firefighters were critically injured in that.
They were indeed. And that was a tiny battery. That was only a 2 megawatt hour battery, and the explosion was caused by just 1 rack of battery cells out of 27 going up in smoke. And there in Arizona, there was no flame. It was not a fire until the firefighters actually opened the door of the cabin, and that had the effect of mixing the explosive gases with air, hitting a hot surface, and then they got a great big explosion, and yes, 3 of them were left with life-limiting injuries.
And Edmund, just before we go, one tweet that's come in whilst we've been speaking says from Pablo, not just battery storage systems, electric vehicles are not safe. What happens, the question is, are the electric batteries in electric vehicles as big a fire risk? And I've got a particular vested interest as I've got an electric car.
Well, as you probably know, there have been fires in the batteries of electric vehicles. I think a Tesla Model S currently has a battery size in the region of 100 kilowatt hours. So an electric vehicle is really tiny compared with the energy storage systems that are connected to the grid. But yes, you're quite right. It's essentially the same electrochemical technology, and they can go up in flames.
Right. Well, there we are. Edmund, thank you so much indeed. That's Dr. Edmund Fordham, physicist and engineer. We've been focusing with his knowledge on the risks of these battery energy storage systems, and if that's where energy policy is going, I think we need to know a lot more about the advantages and the dangers of those systems. But give us a call, 0344 499 1000, or tweet us at Talk Radio, or text 87222 using the word talk with your views. Maybe you think we've got it wrong. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Spreading your opinions.
These boots were made for talking.
Outweigh and outlast all other arguments.
Plain talking, pioneering.
Let's broaden our minds.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Well, that discussion with Dr. Edmund Fordham has certainly got people going. And I wasn't trying to scare the living daylights out of everybody, but I have had one tweet here says, "Thanks for scaring the life out of me. We own a hybrid. What happened when this battery overheats?" Well, the simple answer is that I think the experts, they do need to understand, our fire service needs to understand, and if we're going to build these storage systems, we certainly need to know how to put them out and having the right type of fire suppression system. Surely, equally, on the other side of the coin, I've just had a tweet here, needs a bit of balance. Quite right too. How easily do the batteries catch fire and how often? Great question. Well, there are indeed lots of electric cars driving around. I enjoy mine, and I'm not aware of any electric cars that have caught fire, but there are not that many of these energy storage systems up and down the country. We're just, as I say, just at the beginning of building seemingly more and more of these, and yet actually they have started to catch fire. Where there are many more elsewhere in the world, there have been other fires. So I think we do need to understand and learn from it and know what's going on. And it worries me when you've got a fire service that takes 18 months to produce a report into a significant fire that took 2.5 days to put out, and the conclusion of the report is, we don't know the cause. Seriously? And yet you want to build more of these things? I think people need to get a grip before we build more of these things. But maybe you've got a different view. Meanwhile, in Lancashire, Simon is waiting patiently. Morning, Simon.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
Well, I'm all right, but, you know, a few things have been concerning me, as you may have heard.
Well, it's funny, really, because I saw your tweet out yesterday that this was going to be discussed on the programme. And I'd only recently read a report by a guy called Wade Allison. He's a professor of physics and fellow at Keble College, Oxford. And in part of his report, he actually mentions the dangers of stored energy. And it scared the life out of me. It's basically because so many times on these interviews on TV or radio where, you know, the green advocates say, well, we'll just have battery storage, that'll sort everything out. Well, part of this report said that in the case of a 10 gigawatt for a week, a windless week, which is approximately 1,760 gigawatt hour of energy, and your expert touched on this, this is 2,000 times the energy of the Beirut bomb. Now, you imagine, you know, even if they broke it up to 2,000 separate units, that's a potential of disaster all over the country.
I think this is the point. I think we are potentially going into a proposed solution completely blindfolded without understanding the risks that are potentially being embarked upon. It just seems utterly mind-blowing to me.
And talking about the fire service reaction to all this, I was talking to a Lancashire fireman about 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned this to him, and he said that they were looking into new equipment and new water tanks. And one of the things that came out of the conversation for an EV fire was, even after they've managed to extinguish the fire, the vehicle has to be monitored for 72 hours afterwards on its own because it's got the potential to reignite. Now, that's something I didn't know.
Well, I think this is the point, and I think, you know, it is a massive learning curve. And here's the extraordinary thing, and I will ask the fire service if they want to come on next week to talk about this, because I think this is really important.
Yeah, great idea.
And
yeah.
indeed the health and safety executive. But here's something I didn't raise with Edmund. So this battery storage system was being monitored, remotely monitored by the operators. Turns out it's a Danish company, and it was being monitored from Denmark. And yeah, seriously, it gets worse. They took an hour to ring up the fire service in Liverpool to say, we think there's a bit of a problem, folks, in one of our facilities. Well, that was an hour after local residents had said something badly on fire and has exploded. So it's taken some geezer in Denmark an hour to wake up out of his slumber, ring up the fire service to say there's a problem. It then took them another 2 or 3 hours to send someone round to tell the fire service, oh, by the way, you've got to be careful, you can't do this and this. Well, I mean, yeah. that feels a bit late to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coming back to the electric vehicle, the actual storage mechanism that the Greens advocate so much. Maybe the government are going down the route of forcing people to buy electric vehicles in the future. And I think it's not a case of you're buying your mobility. You're basically buying a battery on wheels that the government are going to use in this vehicle-to-grid storage. And obviously the implications of that with it, the ebb and flow of the electricity that can be obviously utilised by the grid. You know, that with batteries, as we all know, they've only got so many cycles of life in them. And if people go down this route of the vehicle-to-grid, at first it may seem like a good idea, but maybe in about 3-4 years, when that battery is, for want of use, end of life, your 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pound investment on the second-hand car market is worth virtually nothing.
Well, I think that's one of the big questions, actually. A friend of mine had a 4-year-old Tesla, and that over about 4 years, it lost, I think, about 10% of essentially its mileage capacity. And obviously, there is some suggestion that you can replace the batteries, but in a sense, all of this is to play for, isn't there? There's a lot of questions that are unknown.
Yeah, I mean, that is you know, a personal use. Now, you imagine the way the government wants to utilise these kind of satellite batteries, as it were, as a smart grid. Seems a great idea, but in essence, you're giving up the life of your battery to the government. So the government, they probably give great feed-in tariffs at first to encourage this kind of thing. And at first, you may seem like you're onto a good deal, but suddenly, you know, that 3, 4 years, 5 years down the line, where you know it's not for personal use, but every night it's ebbing and flowing electricity. This is the question that you've really got to ask yourself. You know, is this the way we want to go?
Well, I think that's right. An interesting tweet I'll just read out to you, Simon, here. As ever, the old solutions are the best pumped or hydro storage as used in Wales. I don't know about that. Do you know anything about that?
Do we need to build more mountains? Is that what for
I'm not quite sure about that. But actually, also, it is good to get some balance, though. There's someone here just tweeting in that electrical vehicles have a 0.03% chance of igniting compared to an internal combustion engine, 1.5% chance. I don't know the validity of that data, but so I think it is important to put it in context. But what I've really been focusing on is not electric cars per se, but actually these huge storage systems and the lack of knowledge out there as to the risks involved.
Well, I mean, the price of these things, I think EDF did a study on this a couple of years ago. It was out in the Financial Times. So it's going to cost something in the region of £1 trillion to have enough battery storage for a windless week. And let's think about all the rare earth metals, where they're going to come from, China or China-controlled, and they're going to have to replenish the end of life. This is, you know, when they talk about the Russian instance and how we rely on Russia for, let's say, 5% of the gas and a certain amount of oil, we're now jumping from the frying pan into the fire of going to be relying on China for all these rare earth metals.
You're so right, Simon.
Surely.
And we've got to be much more aware of it. And I think that that's why I gave my Sunday sermon. We've got to change direction. Renewables, more renewables will increase the price and potentially increase the risk. Simon in Lancashire, thank you so much for your thoughts there. And just before we go to the top of the hour, into the third hour, just a couple of interesting tweets come here. One says, great programme, the common sense factor in many of the issues, the common factor in many of the issues is the business department, called Bays. I like this. Stuff full of incompetent civil servants who have no clue about the real world, and that's where this nonsense is coming from. Suggesting they're all useless. Well, I have got real concerns about their understanding of what's going on in the real world. But maybe you've got a different view. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Sunday Talk.
Talk Radio. Richard Tice.
Powered by Debate.
Sunday morning with the Tice Man. Richard Tice. The heart of a common sense Sunday.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk and good afternoon. Yes, we have cannoned into the third hour of the show. It's bright and cheery out there. How bright and cheery is it with you? Particularly when you're opening the bills, which is never that good an experience, but we're all seeing and feeling the huge cost of energy bills in our pockets and our bank balances. I've been talking and majoring on this because I think it's actually the big issue of the week, the month and the year domestically. I'm not saying internationally, but domestically for all of us. And yes, it is it's affected by international events because we import so much of our gas, of our energy, which I think is completely wrong. And this week's energy strategy was supposed to address that in terms of self-sufficiency, but I'm really not sure that it did. I've got deep concerns that the focus on extra renewables, much more offshore wind, could actually, all it will do is dramatically increase the price of energy. But also there was nothing short-term, was there, in that energy plan to try and deal with the challenges that everybody faces up and down the country. And one person who I know has strong views on this is the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, Khalid Mahmood. Good afternoon to you, Khalid. Thanks for joining me on the show. So you heard the Prime Minister's, you read the Prime Minister's energy strategy. Were you delighted with it? Does it give everything that you want? Or do you share some of my concerns?
Thank you, Richard. And I think what it does is sort of jam tomorrow, as one of my councillors would say, and really no real direct effect currently. I was out yesterday in my constituency speaking to people, and they're devastated by the cuts they're going to have to make. And, we hear these stories of people saying it's an option between whether they buy some food or keep themselves warm. That is the reality for most of my constituents, and particularly the elderly ones, and particularly younger people, single mothers with young families. And it's a huge effect that the government doesn't seem to think that it applies. And I think in the short term, you quite rightly say, is what we should be looking at. With the NI going up, those people that are working, hard-working people, proud people who actually want to go out and work and do the things right by themselves and by us as we're doing them. And they're going to be hugely affected by all this. And I think what we need to do is to, instead of putting that burden onto the people, we should be looking at these energy companies who made a fortune through no additional work. And so what we want to do is have a tax on those energy companies, one-off tax, in order to pay for the rises that the Chancellor has made on people. And giving them loans of £200 is really neither here or there. And when you give these sort of loans and these sort of issues happen, it becomes very difficult for the person to be able to first of all apply for it and then be able to get back from it.
So Labour policy is to have a windfall tax on the energy producers in primarily in the North Sea. Would you extend that windfall tax to the wind farms that obviously are producing quite a lot of energy now? Because bearing in mind, a lot of those are overseas owned by big multinationals and wealthy investors, and indeed by overseas governments, Khalid.
Well, that's true. And I think what we've got to do is look at the energy industry as a whole, and those people investing and getting very good rates from the government of the payback of the energy tariffs that they're charging. And to increase those tariffs again is similar. It's actually similar to what you're saying, is what they've been able to do is increase the tariffs, both for my residents and particularly some of my small businesses who are having to pay 4 times more what they were paying initially a month ago. And that's really difficult for them to try to come to terms with. And it's a decision between whether they keep people employed or not. So, of course, they should do. And what we've got to do in terms of real strategy is look at how we support our people. Wind farm energy is okay to an extent. First of all, as you quite rightly say, it doesn't meet all our needs. Secondly, the element of carbonization that takes when you produce a piece of steel and then you fabricate it and then you put additional stuff onto it and then you put it out into the sea. Of course, one of the big problems you're going to have in long term is corrosion. when you put metal in that environment. And therefore, you're going to have to take it off again and replace it with something else. That is all a huge amount of additional carbonizing policies that you're putting onto this.
So Khaled, but Boris Johnson wants to quadruple the amount of offshore wind farms, which of course come with huge subsidies and extra network costs.
Well, exactly. You're certainly very much on the tune. What I was going to say is network costs are the key things. When you're putting things out to sea and you're going to lay cables, go back into places where the electricity is needed, that's an additional huge cost on top of that. And these people are the reason why private businesses are into this, because they're making money out of this. They're not, they have not always concerns about the environment.
The green industries are making a lot of money out of it, but many other businesses, such as the one you just touched on, they're thinking about having to reduce activity or shut or go overseas, and therefore lay people off here in the UK because they can't afford to keep going.
Well, that's right. And I think one of the things, although Boris has mentioned in his energy strategy, is looking at nuclear. I mean, we put £300 million into Rolls-Royce's new, smaller powered reactors, which actually can power cities by doing that. That is much more, I think, in the long-term greener policy to be able to deal with that. Get our industry, our own Rolls-Royce industry, to actually start to work with it, get our people working there and deliver that.
That's all fine, Khaled, but the first one of those wouldn't be ready for a decade, 10 years. In the short term, I mean, you've touched on the windfall energy, but are you with me? So would you cut VAT on the energy bills? And what about the 25% environmental levies? Would the Labour Party cut those as well?
Well, I'm not sure whether the party would do that. As a backbench person, in visually speaking, my own part, I think, look, we've got to make it livable for people out in our constituencies and our communities. And in order to do that, we've got to take all the burdens, or as much of the burdens we can, off that to deal with it. And one big thing about more wind energy and solar energy farms is that they actually ruin our environment as well. And I think what we're going to look at protecting that environment for our future generations to come, to be able to roam in those areas, to go to see all the coastal areas. That we want.
But obviously, we need the quickest way to get bills down, as I've been saying, I mean, the government has said, yes, they'll look at granting some more licences in the North Sea. But actually, of course, we've got this treasure under our feet, Khaled, shale gas, that would be a fantastic way to level up, create a huge industry, lots of jobs particularly in northern constituencies. We've all got a vested interest. That could make a real difference. And you can use carbon capture, an emerging technology, and I love investing in technology, so to capture the emissions from gas-fired power plants. Why are we importing gas when we've got our own gas under our feet?
Well, in terms of, I think, shale gas, I have certain issues, particularly in the environment and particularly as an island, the water supply that we have and the aqueducts and the underwater supplies that we have. I would be very hesitant unless those proofs were given.
But it's been used all over America, and there's no evidence at all that, I mean, there's about a couple of miles of difference between the depth at which you're extracting shale gas and the water table, and there's no evidence where it's been done in America of any contamination that I'm aware of.
No, but what I want to do is to have those assurances in the UK, and those assurances are given before you start to look at it. But certainly in terms of the North Sea, I think that's positive. That's something there. That's already the plans are set up by and large, and we should be looking at that. But also the government needs to look at, we only receive 4% of the gas from Russia. And so therefore, why these companies have put these prices up so high when our energy isn't reliant hugely on Russia? That is another issue that Boris has got to answer.
That's because, of course, there's a world market for gas if you're importing it. But if you do what they do in the States, which is use their own domestic gas, it's no coincidence that in the United States, gas prices are a fraction of our gas prices, because essentially they're producing it domestically, they've got domestic contracts, and so they're not exposed to those huge world markets. And the other thing about importing gas, and yes, we maybe only import 4% from Russia, but we're importing a much higher percentage, for example, of liquefied natural gas from America and indeed from the Middle East, there's about a 25% additional transport costs for transporting the gas from wherever it's come from here to the UK. So it's not surprising. It's a lot more expensive.
Well, it is more expensive because of the level, but those were set in the deals that we have. We have these deals that we make, which are not made on the spot. So what I'm saying currently, those prices would have stayed stable currently the way that we should have been. And again, this is where the private energy companies have made huge amounts of money by hiking up now the deals that they have perhaps for the next 4 years under particular rates, which they're ignoring. But certainly I would look at exploring more in the North Sea that we have in order for allow us to catch up with some of our nuclear energy that we can do that.
Indeed. And Khalid, are you aware that the subsidies on all these wind farms, are you aware of how they ratchet up with inflation?
Well, I'm not the full detail of that, but yes, I know that there is elements of that, but I know the actual calculation.
All of these renewable subsidies, all of those contracts, 15 to 20-year contracts, they're inflation linked, most of them to RPI, which is the highest inflation measure. So actually, they're making off like bandits. We know what RPI is at the moment. And again, this is all, overseas-owned investors. They're profiting at the expense of the poorest in UK society.
This is the whole problem when we privatise our energy industry. Coal SID was the original thing under Maggie Thatcher, and it was all going to be a great participation of us buying shares. That never lasted, never took off. All these institutional funders came in and put a lot of money into it, bought out most of that.
Khalid,
we're allowing that to continue.
You need to have a word with your boss, because Keir Starmer doesn't want to renationalise some of any of our utilities. Whereas I actually think that we should be looking at renationalising 50% of all our utilities for that very reason, that actually, basically foreign investors are racketeering at our expense in this.
Well, I certainly think we should be looking at how to calm that situation down, stop these people profiteering of our basic needs. We don't want to privatise our defence industry, and this is exactly the same as that. This is what affects our nation and the livelihood of our nation.
Yes, so
we need to look at that.
Khalid, it's part of our critical national infrastructure, and I think we should be in control of it. Khalid Mahmood, MP for Birmingham Peribah, thank you so much for joining me on Tice Talk with your thoughts. Please have a word with your boss, Keir Starmer. I think this is really important. But give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts, your questions, your views, whether you agree or disagree or are not quite sure. And then we can discuss it. Coming up after the break, we're going to be going back to Ukraine to talk to a volunteer on the ground helping supply those in need. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Channel. Investigate what's under the think bonnet.
Talk loud, talk proud. Highly toxic debate. Battery acid opinions.
A voice above the crowd.
Talk radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are well into the third and final hour of my show. That was Khalid Mahmood, the Labour MP, with his views on Boris's energy strategy. And I want your views, 0344 499 1000. And we've got lots of messages coming in, lots of tweets. A good one here from Gaza, who says, Richard, I didn't know until you said it that we didn't own the offshore wind farms. Tell me, is there anything we do actually own in this great country of ours, excluding debt? Well, Gaza, it's a really good question. And I'm doing some research into the ownership of all of these renewables, these offshore and onshore wind farms, the power station, the Drax power station, the solar farms, because what concerns me is that essentially British consumers are subsidising huge profits, racketeering levels of profits to big multinational foreign investors, private equity groups, and indeed the Danish government. And my simple question is, if the Danish government is the biggest single investor in our offshore wind farms on behalf of Danish taxpayers, if it's good enough for a Danish taxpayer, why on heaven's name isn't it good enough for our own taxpayers? Why are we subsidising and giving money to Danish taxpayers when we could be keeping it here in the UK and having cheaper bills? That is the fundamental question that I think is completely and utterly critical to this debate. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. I'm hoping that we are heading to Ukraine. I'm just looking at my wonderful production team. The connections to Ukraine are difficult, so we're going to take a call first. Alison is in Scotland. Good afternoon, Alison.
Hi, Richard.
How are you doing?
Hi.
What would you like to say?
Well, what it was my father's always done cars for years and years, and I was buying a car 18 months ago to a wee mechanic that he's about 70, and he showed me a clip out of the Evening Times stating that electric cars on impact blow up. You know, the batteries, when there's any smash or a pile up, and I thought, God, I'll not be buying one of them, you know.
Well, it's interesting you raise it, Alison, and I've got a vested interest that I declare, because I have got an electric car. I'm sort of, which I enjoy very much. But there's an article in Autocar that I've just been made aware of that says a battery flame is like a blowtorch that will ignite quickly anything in its path. So I'm sure they've looked at these things, but clearly, if you're in car parks or ferries or tunnels, there are big safety questions to ask.
Well, this was saying in the Evening Times 18 months ago, stating that it automatically blew up on impact. Now, how many accidents are in the motorways every year in this country?
Well, that's right. I mean, these are very big questions, aren't they, Alison?
Yeah, I think it's quite frightening. I wouldn't buy one anyway. It put me off when he showed me that, and he's a mechanic that's. I mean, he's retired now, but he still runs a wee garage that he's got.
Well, I think basically what you're telling me, Alison, is that I should drive very carefully to make sure I don't have an accident.
Yeah, basically, because that was in the Evening Times, somewhere between 18 months and 2 years.
Well, if you find a copy of it, do get it down to us, and I'll have a look at it. Alison, thank you so much for your thoughts there. I think I'm almost scaring myself, but anyway, maybe I'm wrong. Rosemary is in Maidstone, Kent. Good afternoon, Rosemary. What are your thoughts?
Hello, good afternoon, Richard. Well, I'm trying to look at this business in a different way, because I think we're so prolific now with the massive and unnecessary use of electricity. I mean, lighting for a start. I mean, does everything. Do we have to have all these street lights? Most houses are lit up like Christmas trees these days. And also, if we could have solar panels instead of these massive ones in fields, why not along all the north sides of the motorways? And all the commercial buildings in town should have solar panels on their roofs.
Well, of course they could. You're so right, Rosemary. Indeed, as we speak, my sort of background and business is commercial property. I'm looking at putting solar panels on the roofs of industrial buildings, because that seems to me a win-win solution. You're actually generating it from the sun, and the occupier of the building is using it directly. So there's no battery involved, and that seems sensible as opposed to consuming vast amounts, thousands of acres of good productive agricultural land.
Well, precisely, but also, of course, a lot of these buildings leave their lights on all night. Why?
That's absolutely right. I think many of them now have been converting to sort of movement sensor style lights that do turn off. But nevertheless, it's a really good point.
Yes, I've got one handy little wartime thing too for people who are trying to save on their electricity. Fill a large flask with boiled water and put your vegetables in the morning, and by the evening they'll be cooked, so you'll have supper ready. And also, when you're boiling a kettle, don't keep boiling the kettle up. Have a flask there again, put the excess in the flask, put the lid on, and you've got some more. I mean, you can always make a cup of coffee out of it. It won't taste so good if you use tea, because it'll be cooled down a bit.
I'm just going to have... Rosemary, could you just repeat that first top tip? Because that sounds fascinating about the flask and the vegetables.
Yes, well, my aunt used to do that, and I'm pretty ancient. I was born before the war just, so, I mean, I know what a blackout is too, so, I mean, lived all through that.
Yeah.
Aunt used to fill a big flask, one of the ones with a big neck on it, you know, so put your vegetables in, you know, your potatoes and your carrots, and obviously like-minded vegetables. You wouldn't want to put peas or thing like that in it. Fill it up with the boiling water. When you boil your kettle in the morning for your cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is, fill up the flask as well, so boil it all at the same time. So you've got boiling water going in the flask with your vegetables, put the lid on and seal it, and by the evening you'll have your vegetables all cooked.
Fantastic. I'm absolutely love that. That is top tip of the show. Thank you very much indeed, Rosemary, for that. You can cook your vegetables in your flask. I didn't know that. I've learned something new on my own show. That's absolutely fantastic. Rosemary, thank you very much for that. Keep those calls coming in, those top tips, 0344 499 1000. I'm hoping that we may not yet have got my guest from Ukraine on. We've got one more minute, so hopefully. Anyway, we should get him pretty soon. Meanwhile, Sam has messaged in. Why, as an island, have we not invested more in wave energy? Surely this solves the issue of seasonable renewable energy. It's a very good question, Sam, and I think we should be looking into much more tidal energy, hydro energy. But for whatever reason, this government, again, decided, for example, the big opportunity down in Swansea Bay, the lagoon, they decided to scrap that project, when actually I think that we could have developed that would have created jobs, more levelling up, and we would have learned from it about the benefits of tidal power. Not because, of course, let's remember, you can predict tides for over 100 years henceforth. Anyway, there we go. We're going to go to an early break so that when we come back, hopefully we will have my guest from Ukraine. You're listening to Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
A first magnitude star of common sense.
The Tice Man.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We've just got half an hour left in the show, but we've got about an hour's worth of stuff to get through and calls and guests. We are heading out to Ukraine, where I've got a guest who has an extraordinary story. He's volunteered, he's driven out supplies with some colleagues to Ukraine to help out supplying citizens in Kyiv and around, I think, with what they need. So let's go straight to Jack Ross, former journalist, now volunteer. Jack, good afternoon to you. You're a couple of hours ahead of us. Tell us a little bit about your journey to Ukraine and what you're doing there, Jack. What's going on?
Yeah, sure. So we left for Ukraine on Tuesday, drove through Europe into Poland, and then we went from Poland into Slovakia and then Slovakia into Ukraine. And we've been given aid from Norwich. So the people of Norwich actually donated this aid. And so we picked it up, drove from them, picked up more supplies in Kiev, and have started delivering it to people across the country. So our main job is to try and deliver targeted aid. So lots of NGOs have started ferrying in large amounts, and they've been giving it to central distribution centres. But there's lots of vulnerable people, such as elderly people, children, who are being left without because they aren't able to access these services. So we're trying to bring that aid to those people.
Right.
So we have.
Okay, so you're essentially part of that process of getting goods from the big warehouses direct to the vulnerable, the elderly, in and around Kyiv.
Yes, correct. So we've just actually arrived in Kiev today. So we're going to be dropping off the supplies actually after this call, but we thought we'd call you guys first.
No, fantastic. And what are you seeing on the ground in terms of conditions? How concerned are you about safety?
So driving to Kiev was pretty traumatic, I'd say. Lots of bombed out buildings, lots of military vehicles on fire. Thankfully, largely Russian military vehicles on fire. But the Ukrainian people aren't wealthy, especially in the countryside. Like, as driving through, we've seen horse and carts. We've seen people going out in the fields and hoeing fields. And these houses, a lot of them are just shacks, essentially made out of wood, have been shelled to pieces. And we're seeing small private businesses being shelled. And seeing that is quite upsetting because some people have poured their life savings into having a small business, and that's just gone in seconds, all because of Russian aggression. And so in terms of Kiev and the city, we've not seen anything too bad, just lots of military checkpoints. But at the same time, we've not driven into the heart of it, and people do seem a bit shaken. They seem quite relieved the Russians have pulled back. But, we tried to visit some of the other areas around to drop off some different bits of aid, but they're still locked down by military, like the areas which have had mass killings. And they, I think there's some real horror stories there.
Oh, completely. Well. I mean, from what we're seeing and hearing, the horrors are just unfolding and are as bad or worse than anything we can imagine. So in terms of actually supplies, is it your impression, since you've been there, that there's a lot of supplies arriving into the big warehouses? How do you feel that flow is working?
So I think, what I'd say the only silver lining of this conflict is it's brought out the good in a lot of people around the world. So we've seen supplies come from England, all across Europe, Italy, Spain. And so supplies are certainly arriving. I think the issue is just getting them to the people. And there's certainly, we've worked with the group, and hopefully we've sorted some orphans, actually, some supplies, because they're still in Ukraine, but they had no money. So even though there's food available, the supplies available, they didn't have the money to go and get them, or, to go to the supermarket and pick up things. So it's due to the war, has been, I think, those in need have really struggled to get the supplies they need to survive.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, a massive ongoing issue, because no one has any idea how long this war is going to continue and just how Russia may respond. My concern, Jack, is that in a sense, Russia's relocating its efforts to the east, but that may be temporary, and Putin may well turn his bombing and shelling back to Kyiv and around later on.
Well, certainly, we stayed. I forget what it's called, but it's a town about an hour away from Kiev yesterday, and the air raid sirens went off last night for us, and that was a pretty traumatic experience. Obviously, we're panicking, we're grabbing bags. John's loving it. He's a veteran, so he was a bit more prepared than us. But, we were running down to the basement to try and go in there because that's what the owners told us to do. But then they said, these sirens are going off every night. And luckily, again, I think we were quite fortunate nothing happened. But, the reality that it could come back at any time is certainly there. Like the day before we stayed in that city, the Russians had shelled it to pull their troops back safely.
Well, Jack, I know you're busy and I don't want to stop you doing some incredibly valuable work. And, what you're doing is amazing. You and your team, a huge thank you to you from all of us. But most importantly, stay safe. And, we look forward to speaking again, keep us in touch with progress. Thank you very much indeed. That's Jack Ross and his colleagues. They are on the edges of Kyiv, helping with the supply chains, helping sort of deliveries from the warehouses to individuals, to local areas. Absolutely outstanding volunteering there in the face of serious dangers. Thank you, Jack. Now, meanwhile, we're going to head up to a call in Cheshire. Peter, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. How are you doing?
Yeah, not so bad, not so bad. What's on your mind? There's a lot going on.
Okay, there is a lot going on, and I just wanted to say this because I think that mankind is making a huge mistake here. We're looking at this eco-net zero nonsense from the perspective that we as human beings on the planet can actually change the climate on the planet. And I think it's going to turn out to be a huge hoax. One day we're going to wake up and realise this is complete nonsense. And the reason why I say that is if you broaden your perspective, if you look at the temperature of outer space when you're away from the sun, it's minus 270 degrees centigrade. That is incredibly cold. So what that means is that the sun is warming the planet right now by approximately 300 degrees centigrade. And it's doing it from a distance of 93 million miles. I mean, this amount of power is unimaginable. The distance of 93 million miles is unimaginable. But that is what is causing the planet to change. The climate has always changed. It's nothing to do with what we...
Well, this is the point, isn't it? I mean, the reality is we've had climate change for millions of years.
Yeah.
And we will have climate change for the next million years.
Yes.
And anybody who thinks that you can stop climate change is, frankly, a delusional idiot.
Exactly.
And this is my concern. I mean, there are many factors that impact on climate change that we know about, but actually know very little about, in a sense. Things like volcanic activity, sea level oscillation and solar variability. We have no impact on these things.
Yeah, but if you, where you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. And it's because of the myopic way that we're looking at things. We're starting from a starting point of saying, let's say on a sunny day, the average temperature in this country might be 25 degrees centigrade. And we're saying, oh my God, it might get up to 26 or 27 degrees centigrade. But the actual temperature of the planet, if you take away the sun, would be minus 270 degrees centigrade. It's already warming us up by 300 degrees centigrade, 3 times the temperature of boiling water, doing it from 93 million miles away. And we think that if we lag our routes or drive electric cars, we're going to counter the effects of that?
It's the difference between big picture and small picture stuff. Peter, thank you so much for your thoughts. I think staying in the north on the other side of the country in York, beautiful city, we've got Mike waiting patiently. Good afternoon, Mike.
Hiya, Richard. Good afternoon. A beautiful day in paradise.
Absolutely. Well, York's always full of paradise.
Even when it's liquid sunshine.
It's got a great racecourse there, that I do know.
I live about 500 yards from that. My reason for ringing is this with Rishi Sunak's wife. Who leaked it?
Yeah, good question. Well, in a sense, actually, apparently it was in private eye about a year ago, I was told. So
What you've only got to look at is if you like, his staff at that party. And I'll take one example, just one person. She's called Helen McNamara, the ethics person someone took a karaoke machine, but who we don't know. Her husband or partner used to work for the BBC. Now, Allegra Stratton used to work for the BBC. The BBC has always wanted to get back at Conservative Party members. So, kind of the people that they employ, you'd wonder about the people at them parties, what they're actually saying to each other. And also, for instance, this McNamara lady, she worked for Tessa Jewell, who again is the Labour Party. Why do they employ these people?
That's right. I mean, I think the real point is, in a sense, it doesn't actually matter where the story came from. It's just I just think it's the political naivety to not to have realised that there's just morally, it just doesn't pass the optic test, does it? It just doesn't feel right. You've got a guy who's deciding tax policy and who's putting taxes up for everybody. And of course, one of the tax policies he could decide is to say, well, do you know what? We're a bit short of cash, folks, so maybe we've got to change the non-dom status. Oh, no, I can't do that because my wife's a non-dom. You can see the conflict of interest going through someone's mind, can't you, Mike?
I can, and I think the other thing is, what is a shame and a scandal at the same time, is the way that I'm retired, so the way that they treat the retired now is just absolutely diabolical. Everything, they've knocked off the triple lock.
Yeah.
We'll get it back next year. Before next year comes, this money probably say, oh, you know what, we haven't got enough money, so we're going to knock triple lock off again.
Mike, there's so much that needs sorting and reforming. Thank you very much for your call. That was Mike in York. There's also lots of messages coming in. One interesting one here coming. Interesting, Australia has a foreign investment review board that looks into things like foreign ownership of Australian companies and assets. The UK needs something similar. We do. We absolutely do. That's one of the things I am very focused on. Anyway, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about sport. There's some important things that. Keep those calls coming in. More tweets before the end of the show. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio. Open discussion. Healthy debate. Talk Radio. Listen, digest, repeat, understand.
Smart people, smart speaker, smart TV.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. At 1 o'clock, you have, of course, got the irrepressible Bob Mills for the subsequent 3 hours entertaining you on this Sunday. But first of all, we need to talk about sport. This is literally one of the busiest weekends of sport. I'm delighted we've got Tom Clayton here in the studio. Now, Tom, just another quiet weekend or quite a lot going on? So yesterday, an extraordinary story in the Grand National. What happened?
Well, it was just one of those races where the Grand National is one of these lotteries where no one really knows what's going to happen. But in the end, we saw Manila Times, the favourite, fall within the first half of the race. Yeah. Rachel Blackmore was unseated, completely out of it. Then
loads of money gone up in smoke.
Loads of money gone up in smoke. Fortunately, none of mine. Then towards the end of the race, there were plenty coming through that we thought this could be interesting. And then Noble Yates or whatever it was came through 50-1.
50-1.
The jockey, who is an amateur rider. He's also won the Cheltenham Gold Cup, by the way, came through on his last ever race, having announced that he was going to retire earlier on this week, and he just happened to win.
Hey, this sounds like a Dick Francis novel, for those listeners who are old enough to know the old Dick Francis novels. I mean, that's what you write about. It's like a fairy tale. It can't actually be true.
It sounds like the kind of thing that they would make a film about. You know, an amateur jockey has success in his earlier career, then comes back and wins the biggest horse race of the lot.
Maybe they will. I mean, that's just unbelievable, because he announced, was it Thursday or Friday, that this was going to be his last ever ride? Yeah. On a 50-1 shot owned by his father. I've actually met the guy. I mean, they're a lovely family.
Yeah.
Amazing family. Just extraordinary.
Yeah, and this is the glorious thing that is horse racing. Sometimes it all goes by the book and the favourite always wins, but then in the Grand National, it doesn't go by the book. No. We saw that last year when Rachel Blackmore made history on Manila Times, and this year again, what a story.
A proper, true fairy tale. What about the fairy tale this afternoon of the big football game? Yes. Man City against Liverpool, my team, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry, your team's not there, but anyway, this is the big one, isn't it? Really? I mean, does this determine the Premier League?
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, looking at the run-ins, I think both of Manchester City and Liverpool, I don't think they'll drop points for the rest of the season. So I think it almost will determine the outcome of the Premier League season. But then you look at it, the two managers have both said, no, that's not the case. This is just another game.
Well, that's managing expectations. They have to say that.
But interestingly enough, so this was earlier this week, Jurgen Klopp, your manager, came out and said Pep Guardiola is the best in the world. Pep Guardiola, about half an hour later in his press conference, said, no, I'm not the best in the world. He is.
It's like reverse psychology, because normally they're slagging each other off. I mean, not those two, but normally managers
you look back to the days of Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, you know, trying to take digs out of each other wherever they can.
And that's without Jose Mourinho.
Exactly. You know, think about that whole situation. But then there's so much respect between these two, but I think behind the scenes they're both very weak. So this is the big one.
Who do you think? What's your prediction this afternoon?
I think it's two teams that are going to go for it. I think there's going to be plenty of goals. I think... Personally, I know you won't like to hear this, but I think it's going to be a 3-1 or 3-2 win.
That's not what I want to hear, Tom.
To Manchester City.
Wow. And then they meet again
on Saturday.
On Saturday in 6 days' time for the FA Cup semi-final.
Yeah. Which, interestingly enough, they've lifted the broadcasting embargo because they're kicking off at 3:30 at Wembley, and there are no other matches in English football kicking off at the same time. So it means that television broadcasters, for the first time since the pandemic, will be allowed to show a football match between the hours of 3 and 5 o'clock.
Wow. That sounds fantastic. Well, there was lots to go there. And then finally, the Grand Prix.
Yes, a really entertaining race this morning, actually. I very rarely get distracted while I'm on shift. But then it started at 6 o'clock. I ran out and watched the start of the race. And before I knew it, hang on a second, I need to go and get on air to do bulletins. But no, it was a really entertaining race. Charles Leclerc, the Monegasque driver who drives for Ferrari, won his second race out of 3 so far this year. Max Verstappen, the defending world champion, was a solid second place and then had technical issues, had to retire from the race altogether, which brought out a safety... Well, there was a different safety car incident that changed up the order. So Verstappen's teammate finished second. Young British driver George Russell, who's 24 and now teammate of Lewis Hamilton, finished in third place, his first podium with the new team.
Remarkable.
And Lewis Hamilton comes around and finishes in fourth place. So overall, Mercedes looking an awful lot better in terms of their overall pace. Still a long way to go, but Charles Leclerc, brilliant start to the season.
He really is.
He has enough points to lead the drivers and the Constructors' World Championship. He has more points than every other team combined.
He is the man to watch in the future, Charles Leclerc. Tom, thank you so much for that. I know you've got to disappear, but thanks for that update. And of course, I hope Tom is wrong. I hope that Liverpool win 3-0 this afternoon at the Etihad. But meanwhile, Amanda is in East Sussex. Good afternoon, Amanda. What are your thoughts?
Hi, Richard. I wanted to just call before you have to go quickly today about the story in the Telegraph today about Winston Churchill has apparent racist views because of this statue review that Westminster Council have been conducting. And I'm just so angry that Winston Churchill's name keeps being insulted in this way, and the fact that no MP seems to be standing up to this cancel culture insanity in the Conservative Party. I mean, what are they going to do next? Are they going to demand now that the Winston Churchill statue has to be torn down because of this review? And if so, why is it that people that want the statue to remain, why is it that we are not given a voice?
Oh, completely. I mean, you're so right.
In this,
You're so right. It drives me absolutely bonkers. I mean, frankly, this statue review commission shouldn't be going on at all. It's just a massive waste of time and money. But I mean, these suggestions, they are just surely utterly ludicrous. I mean, it's arguably one of the most symbolic and important statues in the whole of the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. If they think they're going to tear it down, I'm telling you now, over mine and a lot of other people out there's dead bodies.
No chance at all, Amanda.
It's not going to happen.
No, that won't happen. I guess what we... Maybe the optimist in me thinks that they're deliberately trying to sort of wind us up, these woke wallies, in the knowledge that it would never happen, but they know it's going to upset us, and maybe that's all they're trying to do.
I know, but why report it in the Telegraph of all newspapers?
Well,
They're supposed to be a conservative news outlet, aren't they?
It's a really good question. Maybe
would even.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Amanda. Maybe they've just run out of other sensible things to report about. I am not sure, Amanda. I can sense your frustration. I am too. Thank you so much for your call with that absolutely ludicrous suggestion. Meanwhile, we've got a great tweet here from Pam, who tweeted in, it's pure common sense as to what you need to be done re our energy strategy, and the need is to put net zero on ice until technology catches up and more research is done about things like electric batteries. Why can't the government see that? Well, it's a great question. Why can't the government see some of this stuff, see common sense, and realise the pain that people are suffering? We had another tweet here. I think actually this came by text message. It's quite simple. Energy, the cost of living, social care, all broken to the incompetence, the ideology, the corruption in our government and civil service. We need a change in policy and mindset and the people running our country. I think it's right. We can do so much better. We really can. And that is the point, isn't it? You know, we are a great nation that can do so much better. There is some good news, though, before I finish the show, and that is that, yes, today, Sunday, the 10th of April, it's the last day in office for Cressida Dick, the Metropolitan Commissioner. And I welcome that. I don't agree with much of what Sadiq Khan does, but actually he was right to essentially to say that her time was up and that she resigned. But it's been 2 months since her resignation was announced. 2 months, and there's not a single word on her replacement yet. 2 months later, we've just got an interim replacement, her deputy, Stephen Howes. Well, let's hope he does a better job in the interim. But I want a really good replacement, preferably actually from outside the police, someone from the forces, possibly someone from overseas. It's such a critical role. It really is. Who knows what will happen, but I shall be watching that very closely. Just before we get to the end of the show, a wonderful thanks to my amazing production team. And talking of amazing, and someone who's very important in a critical role, it is, of course, the next presenter, Bob Mills, who is critical to Sunday afternoons. Bob, hi there.
Good afternoon to you.
How's it going?
It's going very well. I look forward to all my shows. Looking forward to this one. I've got the authors of this book, Shooting the Part, Marks and Graham. Now, all those pictures on the front there, Birds of a Feather, Alan Bastard, Good Night Sweetheart, they're all written, of course, by Marks and Graham.
Right.
And we always finish on live music. Sometimes it's Unknown Acts, but sometimes it's the very opposite. And today, Kiki D.
Oh, there you are.
Live,
Kiki D.
Performing live in this chair.
In this chair, in this studio?
Yes.
Wow. So you have got a
So thank you for doing all the heavy lifting.
I've done all the heavy lifting. Well, I've still got a bit more to do. I think we may have one more caller before we finish the show, but in fact, I think we've lost that caller. But I mean, the tweets are pouring, and Phil says, when will this madness end? The zealots need showing up for the fools that they are. Well, I think we really are in a stage of eco-zealots, eco-bullets. Bullies, not bullets, sorry. And I just think, why are we still suffering this? Why is the government putting up with such nonsense? Why are the police letting these eco-protesters clog up our oil refineries, meaning that, yes, guess what? There's a shortage of, or in some parts of the country, there's a shortage of diesel. Why? Because the lorries can't get from the refineries. I've even heard this morning, someone's phoned in to say that actually some of the lorries in the refineries, they've actually had their tyres slashed, presumably by these eco-bullies, in order to stop them leaving the refineries. And it's all of us that suffer. We suffer with the queues, we suffer with higher bills, we suffer with shortages. And very often, of course, it's the elderly that suffer the most. I think that's unfair. I think that's wrong. I'm never going to stop talking about it. Anyway, coming up, as I say, it's Bob Mills. Thanks very much for listening, for watching, and to my amazing team for keeping me on the straight and narrow. You have, of course, been listening to the home and zone of common sense, Talk Radio, and I've been Tice Talk.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.